Are we ready?
Mhm.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back again to another episode of Wine with Weeda. Now, this episode, I've taken a different turn. We're entering the world of trauma and how we can understand it better when we are practicing with our clients, but also so parents are aware of how a therapy can actually cause harm, I would say is the word, or indirect concern for our little ones. And I have the wonderful Kizzy here today from Attune Speech. Hello, Kizzy. How are you?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Kizzy, you've been on my radar for quite some time. I guess last year I was introduced to the world of trauma-informed speech pathology. Now at university, we weren't taught that. But I guess the more that we practice with clients, the more patterns we notice, the more we should be aware of how we are providing the not only the assessment but also the therapy. So what is trauma informed practice?
That is a great question. So, I think the first thing that people often think of course, because of the word trauma, is that this is very trauma specific. It's something that we only really think about in the context of trauma, but essentially it's actually an approach that we can be using as speech pathologists, as well as, of course, outside of speech therapy too. No matter who we're working with or no matter what context we're working in, it's all about the way that we engage and relate with our clients. It's about considering that there might be things beyond the pure speech therapy work that could be having a role in impacting on what we're doing, which are things that I think we're already aware of. But then I guess
Mm.
also in combination with learning a little bit more about what trauma is and how that is also potentially more common in the people that we tend to support as speech pathologists because of things like, a lot of our clients have differences, and, differences
Mm.
can lead to things like bullying and social isolation and all these misunderstandings, all these other challenges that can be really, really stressful for people and children in particular. And then also, um, if a person has a diagnosis, for example, like autism or an intellectual disability, the research does show us that they are at higher risk of trauma as well. So,
Mm.
but what trauma-informed practice actually is, so it's essentially a series of principles that I can go through, that we follow and we integrate into everything that we do, so that we're thinking about things like safety, connection, trust, empowerment, and all of those things.
Yeah, I love that. I guess with every clinician, but particularly with my practice, I emphasize that connection creates communication, and building that rapport with clients in the first stages of treatment are incredibly vital. And I say that to all my parents because I feel they have this misconception that it's assessment and then immediate therapy. But as we always tell clients, we are continually assessing. We are always assessing. And sometimes during the assessment, you start therapy to see how would the client respond to certain behaviors or certain approaches. And I guess that comes with practice and with exposure to a range of clients. For new grads listening or even parents who are not aware, what tips could you advise for the assessment process?
First, I love that you spoke about how we need connection first before communication, because I guess something that we were taught as when we first start learning about speech therapy is we're taught of communication as kind of this separate thing on its own, because we learn about the different types
Mm.
of communication, the skills involved, and that means that we can sometimes forget that in fact, it doesn't actually exist in isolation outside of, you know, um, within our actual lives. It's part of a whole,
Mm.
and we need that relationship and all of that, like you said before. Um, and I agree, we're kind of always assessing, aren't we? And we're always
Mm.
testing the waters a bit with therapy. So I guess when it comes to what we can consider with assessment, from a trauma informed lens, one of the things that I really like to talk about is the types of assessments that we can use. So sometimes as speech pathologists, when we think of assessment, we think of the kind of the standardized, formal, in-depth, comprehensive assessments like yourself or your DAP
Mm.
or something else as well. And these
Self,
are,
yeah, the self 5, yeah.
yeah, and these are really important, valuable assessments that you know, we sometimes need to use, but sometimes, we don't actually. If we think about the purpose of the assessment, what the client really needs, what they've done in the past, perhaps we can actually be using less formal assessment approaches, or at least giving our client more time to feel that they can trust us, that they feel comfortable with us before we explore some of those more in-depth assessments. And the reason I say that is because of the thing I was talking about with trust and safety. And when we don't feel safe, and not feeling safe, isn't always like a logical thing. We're not thinking, I'm not safe necessarily. We could be feeling nervous. We could be feeling stressed. We could be feeling uncomfortable and not really know why. And our brain can detect that as lack of safety, or
Mm.
perhaps of threat, even without us actually thinking it. And when we feel that way, when we're in that state, it actually becomes really difficult for us to access those thinking, learning, problem solving parts of our brain that we need in order to participate properly in those more in depth or comprehensive assessments. So,
Mm,
so I
mm.
guess, sometimes for me, when I'm still getting to know a client, I can see that they're a little bit nervous or a little bit stressed or anxious. I spend more time on those informal assessments so I can collect the little bit of information that I do need and then save some of those assessments for later.
Yeah, I agree. I do that a lot. I think the concept of building rapport, it doesn't get enough credit as to what it needs to be. And I stress to parents, it's not one appointment after each other. It's following the child's lead. And when I feel or we feel it's right to assess a child to get a better picture rather than something that's masked with fear or nervousness. Yeah, it's so
Mhm.
important for that. You mentioned earlier about trauma, and like what you said before, it's like a physical concern. But what behaviors would you notice apart from nervousness and being worried? Would you notice in a young child?
I guess there are lots of different ways that trauma could present, and as speech pathologists, we can never say for certain if we think trauma is or isn't present. Um,
Mm,
so what all we can really do is look at what's in front of us or the information that we've received, and use our best judgment. And so that could be, for example, some of those fight flight responses. We also call them like stress responses, which is essentially where a person's nervous system has gone into a state of survival. And so that could look like sometimes, it could look like a lot of active, movement, perhaps running around. It could look like getting it quite verbally or physically aggressive. It could even look like the opposite and like a shut down or kind of frozen response, or even like they've gone from being fairly present with us and all of a sudden they seem just really, really tired, zoned out, or doing lots of yawning. So some of those signs for me, I can't necessarily say is actual trauma, but what I can say is, okay, something's happened to their engagement, perhaps to their state of
mm,
regulation. Perhaps they're not currently able to participate in whatever speech therapy work I'm currently doing. Perhaps not even able to socialize right now because usually we can't socialize either when we're in a state of like stress. And therefore, we might need a pause, take a break, and yeah, give them time to regulate again.
yeah. And I guess this is where we always say behavior, child's behavior is also their form of communication. And understanding why they are behaving that way tells us more about the child and what we can do to support the behavior rather than stopping the behavior or changing the behavior, which is so important with young ones.
That's right, yeah, and when we think about the nervous system, there isn't any actual way of stopping that because it's
Mm,
outside of the person's control, outside of the child's control, it's outside of the adult's control as well. If we think about if as adults we've done something that makes us really, really nervous or stressed, perhaps we're going for a new job interview, we really, really want that job, going on a first date, or it's a big exam, or something like, or we're presenting in front of a big group of people. We don't usually do that, and we have that like moment of
mm.
like, a mind blank, or our heart's just racing, or we've got butterflies, or, something like we're sweating, someone telling us just stop doesn't actually
Mm.
stop those behaviors. Why? Because it's not within our conscious control. It is happening. It's a brain body thing that's happening back here in the back of our brain, and we don't have control over that. All we can do is help ourselves come out of that through connection, through regulation, through
Mm.
safety, through deep breathing, through someone really being there and understanding us and helping us. So that's also why, from that perspective, it just doesn't work to just stop the behaviors.
Yeah, of course. And it just made me think of sometimes when parents take their child to their initial assessment, they've already told them, we're seeing somebody who's going to help your talking or see someone to change your talking. And already the language used prior to the appointment sets up the child to feel nervous,
Mm,
questioning what is wrong with my talking,
mm,
why everyone understands me. Why does someone need to address it? What is wrong with me? And
mm.
I guess this is where, as clinicians, we have to be so mindful of the language that the child has heard about themselves and how we support that from the initial appointment.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a great point, Yeah, we're not always aware of what's happened prior to the appointment. And yeah, what
Mm.
the child or the client thinks they're there for. I've definitely had those situations as well, where when I've asked, "Why do you think you're here with me?" The answer's been, "Oh, to fix my talking." I've been like, "Oh, okay."
Mm. We
Because
can't fix, we don't have a magic wand. That's right. That's right. So the main message with all of this is really connecting and supporting the child as much as possible from all levels to ensure the best communication outcome. Now, previously you were mentioning the principles of informed speech practice. Would you like to start that discussion?
Yes, sure. So, it varies depending on what website you go to and which
Mhm.
country as well. Because I guess uh, trauma-informed practice is a little bit different to some of the other programs and approaches we can use that might perhaps be a little bit more step-by-step formulaic. With this, it's a range of principles, but it's meant to be used in a way that works for you, for the client, for the situation. So it's really dynamic and flexible. But essentially, the main ones tend to be safety. So, whether that be physical safety or even like emotional, perceived, felt sense of safety, we tend to use those kinds of terms, which essentially means when we talk about like felt sense of safety, we're essentially talking about feeling safe as opposed to being safe. Because as being safe, like
Mm.
the two of us are right now, we are both safe, but we can still feel unsafe because of past experiences of trauma, because of perhaps what happened just before we entered the session, because of perhaps a trigger in the actual session room. It could be the bright lights, it could be a loud bang, it could be all sorts of things. And all of a sudden, we don't feel safe. And it might not have anything to do with the clinician
Mm.
necessarily. Or it could, well, yeah. So there's safety,
Yeah.
and then there's trust,
Mm.
or it's also called trustworthiness. Yeah, lots of different terms like that, and that's to do a lot to do with the relationship, to do with what we kind of say, how we communicate, and all those kinds of things. Usually, there's also something like choice and control, and if you work in that NDIS world, you'll be quite familiar with those terms. Empowering choice, you're supporting our clients to make more choice, to have more control. Empowerment is another one, thinking about those strengths-based approaches. And then there's often one around respect for diversity. And here we could be thinking about cultural
Mm.
diversity, religious, historical diversity, and thinking about historically what has happened to some of the people that we work with. And then, of course, neurodiversity as well, which is often very, very important for us as speech pathologists to be thinking about. So they're not necessarily brand new concepts to anyone who's listening. I think a lot of us are familiar with these terms, perhaps by different names. We might already be doing a lot of these things. What trauma-informed practice does, though, is, I guess, tie it all together in combination with thinking about the nervous system, the neurobiology, and the kind of the impact and relationship of trauma and mental health with communication as well.
Yeah, it's true. We know this, but we've never really put a label to it. It's just something that we do under the rapport umbrella, rapport and trust umbrella. But it's actually quite refreshing to have specific elements highlighted for us to discuss with clients and parents why we target certain goals in a certain manner. I wanted to touch base about the ownership aspect. Now, you linked that to NDIS and advocating for the child. But I also think allowing a client to take ownership in a session, especially when they are experiencing current difficulties, allowing a young child to pick the activity or pick the goal they would like to do first. And now, in my experience, when I give a client that sense of control or ownership, I have a better treatment outcome and a better, better, better rapport, but as well as the child achieves better success as well. And it's so important as clinicians and parents to really focus on sometimes client-centered approach, especially when the child has complex needs and other difficulties too.
Control is, or feeling a sense of control is so, so important. I completely agree. And a lot of our clients, because of the challenges they've experienced, have often had less control. Um,
Mm,
and this is, you know, I'm definitely not trying to point any fingers at anyone here. You know, this is just something that can happen. And then if we think about mental health and trauma as well, you know, again, a lot of these people have had a lot less control over their lives. So and in speech therapy, we have a really great opportunity to not only provide that, but also to teach it, because sometimes
mm,
our clients haven't had it at all. And so we get to go, well, you know, start with binary choice. We get to, you know, give them scaffolding and modeling and all of that so they can learn it within a safe, controlled environment, which is important before we then
mm.
send them off into the real world, because that can be overwhelming to then, you know,
Yeah,
actually implement those skills. And like you said, I've noticed that too, you know, so much with my clients and with this work. The more I hand over my control to the other person, the more they actually want to do the things that I was hoping they would do with me anyway.
yeah.
And that's about that kind of like that counter wheel concept, where essentially the more we try to push a client to do the things that we really want to do them to do for their own sake, the more they want to just like push back, because they're just psychologically, you know, this is this psychology concept, I guess, and it happens automatically. We just want to push on anything that's been pushed at us. Whereas when we totally take
Mm,
away that kind of, you know, perhaps forcefulness in a way,
mm.
the more we give that person the opportunity to then explore those things themselves in their own time.
Yeah, I love that. I love that we're on the same page and you've got the nice language, but I've just got the layman's term here. I love this. I wanted to touch base, I guess, with going down the NDIS path where children are accessing more services now, more what they did previously. Does that contribute to the concept of trauma and too much intervention for children?
Mm.
Um,
I,
um,
I might need
when
you
they're accessing Yeah, so when that I feel I'll give an example. So I had a young child
to.
who was accessing about over 4 different interventions at one time, and I made the choice with the mother to say, "Look, I think we need to stop speech therapy because the child is actually showing us that he's not enjoying it right now because he's exhausted and he just wants to be in the classroom with his peers.
Mm,
He's withdrawing, and all of these signs are telling us this service isn't the best for the child right now.
mm.
Let's really reassess what is needed." Does accessing too much therapy cause harm, or could it be an influential factor?
It's definitely very possible.
Mm,
I really try not to ever do anything that the client themselves doesn't want to do, because, you know, I don't know what they've been through. I don't know what, yeah, impact this could be having on them. I've been in that situation too, where I've had a few clients where the parents, because they really want to help their child, have really wanted them to be there, and the child themselves hasn't wanted to be there. I would agree that there is a lot of risk when we do that,
mm,
that we are causing more harm than good, because we could be creating a really, even if it isn't necessarily trauma, we could be creating a real negative kind of perception of therapy in general, of speech therapy, you know, and the client, even if they're made to be in the session, is not going to learn anything if they don't want to
Agreed.
learn anything. And so it's
Mm,
kind of a waste of everyone's energy and time, really. Whereas when we kind of, even when we really, really want our child or that client to learn those skills because we know that they'll benefit from them. If we kind of let them be as they are and wait for them to be ready, then they're going to want to do the work, they're going to want to participate, and they're going to make the most out of it as well. Instead, like that counter will concept again, if we kind of keep pushing the speech therapy, keep pushing the speech therapy, they'll practice resisting the speech therapy so much that perhaps in the future, when they realize they really need it, they won't want to take it on anyway because they've had
mm.
such a negative experience of it. So I do agree that we can definitely, in those situations, do
Yeah.
more harm than good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, completely agree. And you mentioned the word resistance, and in my mind, I keep getting the feedback we give our clients when they do good talking or they make a great sentence. It makes me think when a child is consistently hearing good talking, what happens if they just become somewhat immune to that? Like, would that cause a like not a trauma response, but more an impact? Does that impact them, the kind of feedback that we give them, if it's too much feedback?
Possibly. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a really great reflective thought that you just had. Um,
It just came to my mind, yeah.
I guess anything is possible with these things, and there will be times. I mean, this is making me think of something slightly different, but there will
Mm,
be times where we will accidentally do things and say things that could be triggering, could be upsetting, um,
mm,
or could perhaps have done something that we didn't intend it to do, and that is just the case with anyone and any situation. And but the more that we are, I guess, embodying and thinking about those trauma informed concepts and putting them into practice, the more we're reducing the chance or the risk of causing more trauma, or even reducing the risk of, like, if the client already has significant trauma, for example, the more we're implementing these sorts of practices, what the research shows is we're actually reducing the chance of that client experiencing those ongoing long-term effects of trauma as well. So, so yeah, sometimes we might accidentally, do some things that we
mm.
don't mean, but so long as we're building in as many of those trauma-informed concepts, where we at least know that we're reducing some of that risk.
Yeah, no, this is good. Thank you. Thank you for elaborating on that. Um, Now, the most of the followers do see from the young cohort range, early intervention, preschooler range. Could you offer some tips for parents with prior to attending therapy, or even how they can implement the therapy at home, but being mindful of informed, uh, trauma informed practice?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I tend to think of, honestly, and I don't know if this might sound counterproductive to some people, um, but in particular with this age group, I tend to find that kind of like what you're talking about with when there's too much therapy, like sometimes,
Mm.
as parents, we can also get really, really stressed. You're trying to do the best that you can for your child, but perhaps they might be seeing a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist. Then there's preschool, then there's kind of like, you know, general life, work,
Swimming lessons,
swimming
dance
lessons,
lessons, all
yes,
those
dance
extra
lessons,
commitments. Yeah. Mm.
socializing, having friends, you want them to go on play dates, and just there is so, so much going on. And then there's, a lot of parents feel when they shouldn't feel it, but they do, feel the guilt and the shame, and there is so much for parents, that you're dealing with when it comes to engaging in therapy for your child as well. And so one of the things that I often like to first say is to ensure that you're giving yourself time as the parent to also to heal, to regulate, to be okay. Think about what your support system is like. Do you have someone you can go to, who you trust, who you can debrief with, who isn't going to make you feel worse or isn't going to make you feel
Mm,
more stressed? Because we have different people in our lives. Some we can talk to about our challenges, and they will be there and they'll listen and they'll just kind of comfort us. And then there are others we're going to want to problem solve, or going to want to say, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, at least you don't live in this place with this problem. They're trying to help you feel better, but they're not really making you feel better. You know what I mean? So you got to,
we
it's
call that toxic positivity.
um, and so I think it's really important for us as parents to think about, who do I have in my life who I can really go to when I need it, and to kind of link in with them as regularly as you can. What do I do that can help me feel okay with myself and feel a little better, whether it be something like even just taking a few deep breaths each day, but turning it into a routine. And then the other thing that I was saying maybe is a bit counterproductive, or some people might think of it as counterproductive, is actually, I like to say that if you are so, so busy with keeping up with the therapy and the homework that's involved in the therapy and all those things, to actually try um, pausing some of that, and ensuring that you're getting a little bit of one-on-one time if you can. Not all parents will be able to do this, and I totally understand, but if you can, getting as close to one-on-one time with your child as possible, where all you're doing is enjoying each other's presence. There is no
Mm.
agenda. There's nothing you have to achieve. There's no right or wrong. There is no homework practice. And it's just about the two of you having a good time together. And I would say that, if you're in a place where you don't have time for that, I would say skip the speech therapy for now. Make sure you have
Mm.
time for that first, and then build the speech therapy in later. Because what the research shows is it's that time where you two are enjoying each other's presence that really helps to create that protective factor for your child, and helps build their resilience, their tolerance, and all of those other beautiful things.
Love that. I think that is so important as a mother myself. But even when we're working with parents, I can just completely resonate with I have to simplify my language. I have to use choices. I have to have pauses. So in their mind, they're thinking of all the have tos, but
Mm,
sometimes the only have to is connecting, connecting and enjoying each other presence, because once they have that foundation, it allows all those other strategies to fall into place when it's the right time for the family and
that's
for the
right.
parent.
It,
Because I use this phrase with a mother the other day, therapy talk burnout. Now, I'm so used to communicating as a speech pathologist, and so are you, but parents that have never had exposure to our strategies find it incredibly exhausting, that it's too much for them. And so I discussed the concept of therapy talk burnout, slow it down, limit, reassess what's best for you to be the better version of you for your child at that time.
I love that term. I'm going to start using that term too. That's a
But
great
it's
term.
true, it's therapy talk burnout.
Yeah, and once the child has that foundation with the parent, then they're going to be, and perhaps the mother and child, or the dad and the father and child had that, but then it got a bit lost because of all the therapy and the homework. But once
Mm,
the child has that connection again, then it actually helps them, like you said, do all the other homework stuff, because it gives
mm.
them a better foundation to then kind of launch off of as well. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I love this. Thank you so much for coming on Wine with Rita, Kizzy. It's been quite refreshing. It's like what I mentioned earlier. It's something that as clinicians, we know, but it's really nice to have specific points to refer to, but also encourage parents to refer to if they are more interested in that path.
Thank you so
Now,
much for inviting me.
do you offer parent training yourself in this field?
You know what? I've never done parent training before. It's kind of only been speech therapy training, but maybe I should think about it.
Yeah, I feel although as speech therapists, we implement it and encourage it, but supplement, especially if it's the whole too much, they might need to see something to then focus on another area, which is more important.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really great point. Well, yeah. I mean, if there's interest in it from me, then maybe I'll think about it and see what we can do.
Yeah, so, can you tell me what's professional development that you offer for speech therapists or even allied health professions out there
Yeah.
and how they can access it?
So I essentially do webinars at the moment where every now and again, currently it's about once a year, I will do a webinar where, speech pathologists can get tickets and attend. It's usually a 3-hour webinar, and I go into more depth on trauma-informed practice, how we can do it, and all those wonderful concepts. So I try to make it both about, how the trauma impacts the brain as well as what we can really do. But it's, as I said before, not just for trauma. And I don't really have a regular date for that, but if you join my mailing list, which is on my website, www.attunedspeech,
Mhm.
ATTUNED speech.com.au, you'll be able to follow that. I also offer training for organizations. Every now and again, they might reach out to me like using the form on my website, and I'm very happy to speak to the team, yada, yada. And the 12th of September, I'm not sure if this will come out before then,
Ooh,
but
it's
I will.
coming up.
Yes.
Yes, it will.
Oh, great. On the 12th of September, I am also presenting for Speech Pathology Australia, and that's a two-part,
Yes, I did see that. Yep, yep.
it's a two-part, 2-hour each webinar, and where I will go into those things as well. Thank you, Rita.
That's fantastic. Congratulations on that. But for anyone referenced Kizzy's website, it will be linked in the bio. And I did the course last year, funnily as I was ironing and being mum life, but trying to balance everything. And it was really informative just to be reminded of all the strategies and how we need to implement them with our practice in our practice as well.
You can also follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn. It's Attuned Speech or Kizzy Searle, if it's LinkedIn. But honestly, thank you so much, Rita, for having me on this, on your lovely podcast. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you for coming on, and I look forward to working with you soon and implementing trauma informed practice with my clients. Thanks, Kizzy. Have a great evening, a great day.